Welcome to Lecture 2, the neuroscience of belief. I want to begin by introducing you to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes, one of the most iconic logical creations in all of literature. His entire lifestyle was based around logic. He solved major crimes using logic. Inductive logic and deductive logic. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created this character. However, in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's time, there was a major trend going on in the culture of spiritualism. That we could talk to the dead through seances, we could contact the dead in any number of ways, and beliefs in fairies and fairyland. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was deeply a part of this. And he was actually taken in by the Cottingley fairies. The Cottingley fairies came about where a couple young girls actually cut out pictures of fairies from books or drew their own fairies and cut these things out, propped them up around the plants in their garden and took photographs. And these young girls claimed that out in their garden, the fairies would come and visit them. Now in today's culture, that might seem kind of silly, and somebody would pick up from the photographs fairly quickly that these fairies are just paper cutouts. But in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's time, when photography was fairly new, this was very, very powerful evidence that fairies actually existed. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of one of the most logical characters in fiction, fell head over heels for this. He deeply wanted to believe it. How is it possible that the creator of this most logical person could fall for something like spiritualism, could fall for something like fairies in the garden? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a very good friend of Harry Houdini, the famous magician at the time. Harry Houdini was famous not only for being a magician and an escape artist, but he was one of the world's most pronounced skeptics of spiritualism. He spent a whole lot of his time debunking spiritualists and psychics. Because as a magician, he knew that the same tricks these spiritualists were using were the same tricks that he and other magicians were using on stage. And these spiritualists were using these tricks to con, to fool, to manipulate the public, to get lots of money from the public. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Houdini had a really, come to fist blowdown knockout on this, where Sir Doyle was saying, yes, they exist, and Harry Houdini is saying, no, they don't. And it actually ended their friendship. But we look at this, how is it possible that anybody could believe in some really strange things? Well, our brains are actually belief machines. We were born to believe. We want to believe. What really drives this belief mechanism then? Our default mode is to arrive at beliefs for emotional reasons. Then after we have our belief, we employ our reason to justify our beliefs. As human beings, we are really just slaves to our emotions. Excuse me. Much of our thinking process, much of our cognition takes place in our primitive brain. This is where our emotions, especially emotions like fear, hunger, lust, anxiety, disgust, sadness, these where these emotions truly ride. It is so much easier to follow the decisions from our emotions than actually to think about our decisions. Thinking is hard work. We don't do a whole lot of thinking throughout our day. And so it's so much easier just to follow our emotions and create these beliefs from our emotions. We're all probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from physiological needs, safety and security needs, our social needs, our love and relationship needs, our self-esteem needs, our self-actualization needs. But as human beings, we have many other needs as well. These are just 5 of them. When we meet needs, our brain actually gives us a little reward. Our brain gives us a shot of dopamine and makes us feel good. As part of these needs that we have a very strong need to actually feel in control. We don't like feeling like victims. And in order to get this feeling of control, we frequently develop superstitions or magical thinking. If I use my lucky horseshoe, that's going to give me luck. I wear my lucky socks and I have a better ball game. I knock on wood 3 times every time something bad happens, or I say something positive. We have all these superstitions to help us gain control. The feeling of a lack of control actually enhances pattern recognition. So the less control that we feel, the more we're able to recognize patterns out in the world, even when those patterns don't truly exist. We have a need to simplify. We don't like feeling overwhelmed by the world. We want things nice and simple. So we create pigeonholes and stereotypes as a way of simplifying our world. Examples could be in medical diagnosis. If you're a physician and the last 6 patients you had all had the flu, that 7th patient comes in and presents with very similar symptoms, it's just simpler to diagnose them with the flu as to go through the whole process of diagnosis and really critical thinking. We do this all the time. Reality is always more complicated than we think. We have the need to give meaning to things. We want there to be meaning to activities. We want there to be meaning to our life. We want our life to have a purpose. We want to believe that things happen for a meaningful reason. A good example of this is the assassination, whoopsie-daisy for meaning, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We believe that big events have to have big causes. It's hard to think that one lone nut assassinated a president of the United States. One little crazy guy assassinated the president of the United States. Just one. That is so difficult for us to believe because we want to think large effects must also have large causes, and so we bring in all sorts of conspiracy theories. No, it was the government working with the mafia, all sorts of conspiracy theories to bring in when it was just one lone guy. It's so difficult for us to believe. We have a very strong need for self-esteem, for having a powerful ego. We are intensely social beings. We like being around other people. We like being around other people who are like us. We want other people to like us. We want other people to know and respect us. We're intensely social beings. We always tend to interpret the world that is in a favorable way to us. We interpret the world so we're the heroes. We call this the fundamental attribution error, where we look for external causes to explain somebody else's behavior. We look for internal causes to explain somebody else's behavior, but we look for external causes to explain our own. For example, you see somebody walking down the sidewalk and they trip over the crack in the sidewalk. You say, oh, they're clumsy. But if you're walking down the sidewalk and you trip over the sidewalk, you explain that externally. That person who made the sidewalk left that gap too big. We explain our own behaviors with external causes. We explain somebody else's behaviors with personality defects. We do many, many things to avoid social embarrassment or social stigma. We have a very, very strong resistance to admitting our errors. We don't like to say that we're wrong. We have this need to be consistent. This need to be consistent, this need that we don't want to admit our errors is something that salespeople exploit and take advantage of. They'll get you into a question and answer session and ask you, could you find any useful purpose for this product? You know, could you use this product? Do you think this is a valuable product? And as you start saying, yes, I could find a use for this product. Yes, I think this is a valuable product. Yes, it's probably a good value. You would seem absolutely inconsistent then if you did not purchase it, even if you wanted it or not. And so many of us will purchase something we don't even want so that we don't seem inconsistent to that salesperson. Many times the salespeople will get you down to what's called the final objection. If it wasn't for this one reason, then you would purchase my product? Yes, that's the one reason I won't purchase your product. And then the salesman comes up with something and takes that one reason away, and now in order to be consistent, you must purchase that product. Salesmen love it when you object to them, because that gives them the opportunity to play on your need for being consistent. Conflicting beliefs set up what's called a cognitive dissonance. That is, if you believe two things that conflict, this is a cognitive dissonance. And we have ways of handling these things. One is to compartmentalize. I believe this one on Mondays, I believe this one on Thursdays. That the situation isn't appropriate for me to believe this now, so I'm going to believe this. We compartmentalize. One way is to either update one of those beliefs or both of those beliefs, or even to throw one of these out. Then, if there's this conflict is too great, what we do is we start really rationalizing, coming up for reasons why we should believe this, why we do believe this, why this belief is true and valid, even though at some level you really know it's not. This might form into some sort of special pleading that it's the conspiracy that all this other evidence for. There's this government conspiracy for this. We have special pleading going on. We are actually have a sense of morality within us. We have a strong sense of morality. There's a sense of morality or sense of justice that's actually born into us. And it's not just born into human beings. There's been several scientific studies showing that many creatures other than human beings also have some sense of morality. That the morality is hardwired. One of the tests of morality is called the train switch example. Suppose there's a train going down a track, and right where you're standing is the switch, and one track leads off one way and another track leads off another way. Imagine on one track there's 5 people, and on the other track there's only 1 person. And in contrived circumstances, these people can't get off the track. If you switch that train, it'll move over and only kill 1 person. If you don't switch the train, it's going to go over and kill 5 people. Would you switch that train? Most people say yes, they would switch that train. How about if we change the situation a little bit? If you're standing at the train station and a train's coming by, and there's 5 people, there's 100 people down that track. And the only way you could stop that train is by throwing that person off that's standing next to you right on the track. And as that person falls on the track, they're going to clog up the gears and the train will stop and you'll save those 100 people down there. Would you be willing to do that? Most people say, no, I won't be willing to do that. Now the logic is the same. You're sacrificing one to save a whole bunch more. But one is a little bit different. And we have that there's a sense of essence. We have a sense of essence that objects carry some sort of personality with them, that objects carry something about them of the previous owner. Would you wear a sweater that the sweater was previously owned by a notorious mass murderer? And the sweater's been cleaned and dry cleaned, and it's just a normal sweater, nice wool or acrylic or cotton. Would you actually put that sweater on and wear it, knowing that it was previously owned and wore, it was the favorite sweater of this mass murderer? Would you put that on and wear it? Most people actually say, no, I won't. But we have this sense of essence. This is where our sense of spirituality comes from. A good example of a sense of essence would be a child's toy. Some toys a child has, they get worn out, you replace them, same thing, the child doesn't really care. But many children develop a favorite toy, a toy that they imbue this essence into them. And no matter how worn out that toy is, if you say, here, let me swap it out with this brand new one, the kid's going to say, no, 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 this one. I want this one. Because there's a sense of essence that we have in here. We process in our brains living objects differently than non-living objects. And unfortunately, it's not that clear. It's not just living objects that we process differently than non-living objects, but it's objects that we consider that have agency. That is, objects that seem to act on their own, have a personality, have a free will. You process differently, suppose a tree branch blowing in the wind. You know that's really not the tree moving, but it's the wind moving the tree. You process that differently than you do a cat or a dog. Our brains process this information totally different. It's why we can actually put emotions onto cartoon characters, because the cartoon characters seem to be acting independently. They seem to have a mind of their own. They seem to be alive. They have agency. This brings into supernatural forces, that we see agency all around us. We have what's considered a hyperactive agency detection center, that we see these patterns and we see this big hand behind it. One of the most pervasive thinking errors we have is called the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is where we look for data that supports our belief, but we ignore data that contradicts our beliefs. And we all do it. It's one of the things we seriously need to be on the lookout for. If you're reading scientific studies, it's one of the things that you have to be on the lookout for. Did these people creating the study, were they just looking for confirmatory evidence, or were they also looking for disconfirmatory evidence? It's difficult to change our own behavior through reason. And you all know that it's difficult. If you've ever tried to stop smoking or get on an exercise program or change your diet, your reason knows why you should do all this stuff. It's very, very difficult to change our behavior through reason, because we are emotional beings. Typically, when we try to change somebody's behavior, we do it through social norming, getting everybody else to start doing it, making it seem like everybody else to start doing it. A good example of this is seatbelts. When seatbelts were first enacted into law, actually very few people wore seatbelts. Shortly prior to that, seatbelts were an option in your car. There were all these public service announcements about how important it was to wear seatbelts, but people weren't wearing seatbelts. And so the advertisement changed into a social norming aspect. When you saw characters in the television shows and the movies get into their car, you saw them put on a seatbelt. And this became a social norm, and now actually most people do wear seatbelts. We are highly intelligent people. But it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, the higher your intelligence does not mean you make better decisions. All it means is you're better at rationalizing the decisions you make. We also need to look at emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is understanding this relationship between our motivations, our emotions, and our behaviors. We need to be aware of how we relieve our cognitive dissonance through our rationalizations. We need to be able to use our frontal lobes, our human part of our brain, to make good decisions rather than just rationalizing the decisions that our unconscious minds, that our reptilian minds are making. We really want to believe that we are rational beings, but in reality, we are emotional beings. In our next lecture, I will talk about errors of perception.